board now for those who might not be able to join us. And I wanted to start with a little bit of discussion around some of the questions I see that a lot of you have posted to the 321 reflection, which means you've read some of the content, you've had observations, kind of 3 key ideas, some things that were interesting to you about what you read. And then what I really tried to key in on was some of those questions that you guys posed for things that you wanted to, think more deeply about. So I'm going to just kind of start our conversation. We're going to be talking about issues related to cohabitation, living together, living single, those types of things coming from chapter 4 today. But I wanted to start with a couple questions, and you're welcome to use the chat feature to share your thoughts and ideas on this. And or unmute and let's just have a conversation. Someone just asked a question in the chat about the exam. The exam is not listed for this week. It is posted for next week. So I'll go there now since it was asked. You will see that to the bottom of week 4, exam 1 study guide has been posted. That is a document that will help guide your thought process as you review content for exam 1, which is your asynchronous material for next week on Monday. So in the place of having any additional reading or discussion, next week on Monday, the exam will open at 8 o'clock in the morning. It will close at 11:59 p.m. Make plans to carve out an hour of your day for Monday dedicated to exam 1. If you do not take it on Monday, you do not take it. It will be a continuous experience. You cannot log in and out. So once you access the exam, you will have an hour before the exam closes. The exam will be open book, open notes. So you're welcome to use any of the class resources that you have access to while you're in there. It's all multiple choice, matching, short answer, or true, false. And again, that is happening on Monday, September 19th, between the hours of 8 a.m. and 11:59 p.m. Does anyone have any questions regarding the exam before we move on? Do I hear a question? No. Let's see. Okay, I am going to address the reflections one more time. I'm still getting a lot of questions about this. The reflections right here where it says submit reflections 1 through 5. These are due on October 10th. If you click into this link, there's a reflection assignment document. There is also a rubric. These are the things that you need to access to answer your questions. I feel like if you look into this document, it pretty well tells you what I'm asking for. The only thing that I'm going to draw your attention to today is that reflection 1 is supposed to be written about marriage preparation and relationship programs. It's telling you to read an excerpt on page 18. The excerpt on page 18 is specifically about marriage preparation and relationship programs. Read that, summarize it, critique it in your own words with your own thoughts and ideas. The rubric will give you more guidance in terms of specifically what I'm looking for, in terms of the writing and citations and things like that. But access these 2 documents, and then you should just make a note of these page numbers. This is the reading that goes along with what you're writing about. Does that answer your question? Yes, good. Someone also just posted, so we're shifting gears now unless anyone has burning questions or concerns about the exam or the reflections. So we can use in-text citations. So when you're writing at the university level, if you are drawing on information from another source, you cite in-text citations at the end of your reference to whatever information you're sharing, even if it's not a direct quotation, right? If you're talking about something that came from the textbook, at the end of your statement, you would put in parentheses the last name of the author of the textbook and the year. If you're using APA, MLA is a little bit different, but you can use either one, whichever you're familiar with. And then at the end of your page, you should have a references section. These are 5 individual 1 to 2 page write-ups. So you're going to be turning in a total of about 5 to 8-ish pages all together, reflections 1 through 5 at one time in one running document. And it should have references. A lot of times people also draw on, the supplemental readings, articles, those types of things that have been posted. So anything that you cite that you're using as a source of information, you're going to cite in your references section. Anything else on that? Okay. So someone put a question into the chat specifically about cohabitation. Don't want to live with my partner before marriage. I question what's the difference between cohabitating and marriage. So I guess this isn't a question, it's just an observation about this topic, right? Something special about that idea of sort of embarking on life together in a cohabitation situation with marriage. That's definitely an observation. And I think, I think for a lot of people that, feels right. And then for other people, you make the comment at the end, if I want to know what it's like to be with him, I would go on a trip. For some people, that maybe isn't sufficient. Some people, and this is kind of when we get into this idea of living apart together, which is what your supplemental reading for Monday was on, right? Is this idea that people want to be in committed marriage relationships, but for whatever reason, they prefer to have their independent living situations. And so for people who have very specific preferences about their living situations, or perhaps feel like they need more space and more, independence, that idea of cohabitating and actually living together as a married couple is not appealing. So I think this is another one of those things, right, that exists on kind of a spectrum of experience. And we find ourselves situated somewhere along that spectrum, with everyone being very individual in terms of their needs and their desires for partnering in relationships. Kind of related to that, one of the questions that came up from the discussion forum was this idea of loss of independence. Someone posed the question, does cohabitation cause married partners to feel a loss of independence? Do you guys have thoughts or ideas on that? Do you think that living together in the same home could contribute to feelings of loss of independence for a partner?
In my opinion, I think it's like a big adjustment for someone that's very independent, like solely like me. I'm like someone that doesn't like living with someone. So I feel like getting into a committed relationship and like, let's say marrying someone and then ended up living with them, it could be a big adjustment. You have to know how they work, but also have your morals in life, just both of them colliding together.
Yeah, I think some people are saying in the chat, it's very dependent on the person. And I think that's true. I also think that I think that loss of independence is probably a natural response for anyone who is, making this transition. It's a major life transition, and even though you might be feeling that loss of personal freedom, someone mentioned in the chat, there's this new sense of independence because you're learning how to balance and manage having your own space and having your own time while also doing that in partnership with another person. So I really think, someone in the discussion forum I read last night said, I don't really understand this LAT situation, living apart together. because it seems to me like people in a committed relationship would want to sort of confront the challenges of living together and partner through that. And I definitely think, you know, that's a valid perspective on the issue. But I think for some people, and you guys heard from a couple who's been doing this for some time quite successfully, you know, so I think, and someone in the chat just now said, you know, taking time apart might actually, you know, there's that old adage, absence makes the heart grow fonder, right? It may have some beneficial factors related to how you come back together. But I definitely think that idea of loss of personal freedom is something that has to be negotiated, you know, probably at the point at which a couple decides to cohabitate or not. And then if they're cohabitating, you know, we talk about the family development framework and that idea that families and relationships kind of evolve over time and have these developmental milestones that occur in the relationship. I was just having a conversation yesterday with someone whose husband recently retired, and she's like, we have so much togetherness right now, you know, like I feel like he doesn't have hobbies. I had hobbies and now he wants me to like do all the things with him. And so they're struggling through this new phase of their relationship. And again, it's around that idea of kind of loss of personal freedom and independence. So something to think about, and it might show up at different points in the relationship. Another person brought up the idea of legal issues surrounding like a child custody agreement in the situation of couples living together apart, right? So I would venture to say that couples who are doing this this setup, you know, they're doing it in an amiable way, right? There's no bad blood, there's no hard feelings. So I wouldn't think it would be typical for a couple to be having like a custody disagreement. They would likely need to come to some consensus and agreement on where the child would be at different points. But that brought up another question on someone's discussion was, you know, what would the effects on a child being raised in this situation? Like, what would that look like? What are your thoughts on how this might impact a child, you know, being in different homes with parents who are still in an active marriage, not a child of divorced family? Someone said maybe confusing.
I think depending on how the parents go about it, it could be really like confusing and like personality or like life changing for the child, like in its development stages. Because if they're not civil about it, then one could be talking bad about the other or vice versa. And then it gets really confusing and put in the middle for the child. But if they're very like adult about it, it could be healthy because then they get one experience at one house and then maybe one at the other with like a good balance.
Yeah, I think confusion is a possibility. And I definitely think what you said about how it's being discussed and how it's being presented is going to be key, you know, and I think I really think that's probably the key to all of it is the presentation and the communication around it. Again, I think someone's made the observation they grew up in two houses and it never felt like they had an actual home. And I think at a certain point, you know, when the child is old enough to have some autonomy around being a part of this decision making, that it would be important for me as a parent to kind of bring them into the conversation and to just have, again, open lines of communication about how this is impacting all the members of our family. So yes, I think, you know, just from this brief conversation that we're having, you can see how there are likely some very clear drawbacks or challenges to that, you know, living together apart dynamic. But again, you know, I don't want to present it in too negative of a light because for a lot of individuals, this is something that really fits for them and seems to work well. So I think it's all about knowing what you need and then being able to advocate for that in a way that is respectful to all parties involved. All right. I'm going to kind of backtrack a little bit now and opening up the PowerPoints that were posted. So I want to say again, I hope that you all are developing some sort of practice around note-taking for this class, either having the PowerPoints that I have given you on As You Learn open while we're having our discussions and typing some notes into those, or perhaps doing pen and paper note-taking. But people who are going to do well on exam 1 are going to be people who have accessed this information on their own and or in class, and have done some form of note-taking around the ideas that are being discussed. I see something else in the chat. Gotcha. All right. Okay, so I want to make it where you guys can see what I'm showing you. All right, are we all there? Chapter 4. Okay, so we're going to be talking about different types of singlehood, single lifestyles of choice. I want to spend a few minutes talking about this idea of delayed marriage. That's a trend that has, it's a recent shift in our society and in our culture. And so we'll talk about some reasons for that. I don't think we really need to spend much time talking about hanging out and hooking up. I doubt I can teach you much about that. That's kind of feels like, another trend, right? We all understand what those things mean. Long distance relationships becoming more of a trend because as a global society, we are, spreading out and living in many different places. And so that's more typical nowadays. Again, we're going to talk about cohabitating, and we've already spent some time talking about this LAT, living apart together dynamic. So, singlehood relationships. There are people who are single who have never been married. When I move things around, are you guys seeing all of that? Or are you just seeing the PowerPoint? Nothing's changing on your side, right? Okay, good. Sorry, I have a lot going on my screen at the moment. So there are never married singles, people who have chosen to not ever be married, right? And then other types of singles are divorced individuals and also widowed individuals. They all fall under that category of being single. Most of the time when we refer to single individuals, though, it's usually associated with young unmarried couples. Typically, if people have been divorced or widowed, they may be referred to in those terms. But generally speaking, single, applies across the board. Some issues, current trends related to singlehood. Sologamy, the text describes sologamy as actually individuals who have married themselves in a civil ceremony. So they have made a commitment, a long-term commitment to remaining single and have chosen to engage in civil ceremony to be married to themselves. I think it gave in the text the observation that people sort of were put out with this idea, that people are always like, well, why haven't you gotten married? Why are you still single? Because we do hold this expectation, generally speaking, right, in our society that by a certain point in time, that would be your experience. And so this idea of sologamy was sort of a response to that. thinking now about that idea of delayed marriage. The text gives you some reasons for why that might be happening. But if everybody would take a second to type into the chat, what are your thoughts on kind of the key reasons that in our society now we see people waiting later and later in life before they make that commitment to a married relationship? Divorce rates are higher, so marriages are largely unsuccessful. I think by more than half now. People want to experience personal freedom. Lots of people are saying the financial aspect, career choices, right? We need more time. Actually, it's interesting. My first degree was in psychology, and you talk a lot in psychology about these developmental phases, stages, and it used to be that we talked about, infancy, toddlerhood, childhood, adolescence, adulthood. Somewhere about 10 to 20 years ago, they actually added a phase of development called extended adolescence, which is where I would say the majority of you likely are right now. Between the ages of about 18 to 23, 24 is considered extended adolescence. And again, that's kind of relative to people's experience, but the idea there is, and it's related to both the finances and kind of the career piece that people are saying, is that, we need more time to go to school. What used to be a 4-year degree is now more like a 4 to 6 plus, depending on what you're trying to accomplish with your education. But that all takes more time. And so things are just kind of naturally getting pushed back. And then you want a few years to kind of work before you settle down. I think all of those things are very valid reasons. Trust issues, more education. So in particular, we're seeing more women with education. But again, that education piece kind of hits on both sides, right? It takes longer to finish your education. And also, I think we're seeing more women in the workforce, perhaps less pressure to get married and do the traditional lifestyle. More people going to college. Yes. So again, and that idea of higher divorce rates, and people kind of coming into relationships with baggage from previous relationships, and also the observation that, marriage relationships in general in our society maybe don't tend to go well for a lot of people. So coming into it with that observation could certainly be impactful. I think, again, all of these ideas are valid. Another one that the text mentions is, so people who are coming into coming maybe out of blended families. So their parents were divorced, they're a product of a blended family, and they perhaps have fear around that, in addition to fear of divorce, fear of, and we're going to talk later in the course about issues related to step parenting and, step sibling relationships. All of those things kind of bring their own dynamic into family relationships. The last bullet point on here is the word singleism. So singleism is a stereotyping. It's a societal stigma or discrimination against single individuals. Kind of related back to that idea of sologamy is, there's again this expectation that people will become married by a certain point in their lives. And that is often kind of a place where people feel discriminated against if they don't follow that societal norm. There are also sometimes institutional policies like health insurance benefits and things like that you may see unequal treatment of single individuals as compared to married peers. And again, that's a specific type of singleism. All right, so we're going to look now at some changes to kind of the dating experience. that we're seeing in our society today, and just some ideas related to dating, right? So this first bullet point is related to confirmation of the social self. So this is kind of a product of a dating relationship, right? When we engage in dating with another person, it confirms our social self. If you think way back to week 1, when we read about different relationship types, the symbolic interaction framework, which is a way that helps us understand relationships, right? It has this component of it called the looking glass self. You need to know what the looking glass self is and what that means. And so it is this idea that we sort of develop our own self-concept in relation to assessing how other people think and feel about us. So this happens when we're dating, right? When I assess how another person thinks or feels about me, it confirms who I believe I am in the world. A product of dating is just recreational, right? We go out with one another, we have a good time together, all of those kind of fun aspects of dating. It also provides us companionship, intimacy, and can provide sex partners. So there's this kind of sense of security and connection with this one, or a few special partners that we relate to in dating relationships as a part of our sort of larger social experience. The idea number 4 of anticipatory socialization, that is the notion that dating itself kind of provides us a context for understanding how to partner with another person, right? So it is highly unusual. It does happen, but it's unusual that you meet a person, date them forever until you marry them. And then, like just this one person, right? So all of these other dating experiences are generally speaking, kind of offering us a space to practice how will we relate to another person in terms of like a long-term partnership. That's the idea behind anticipatory socialization. Sometimes dating serves the purpose of helping us to achieve status. So often we think of being in partnership with another person, a romantic partnership, as being associated with increased life satisfaction. People who are in long-term committed relationships sometimes report being generally happier or having less stress. There's also, again, that sort of normed behavior, right? That it's a societal norm relating back to that idea of singleism that we talked about. But sometimes partner involvement serves this function of helping us achieve social status. It is also related to mate selection. So sometimes, dating an individual, the purpose is to find a mate, find a partner, procreate, all those things. Some trends that we have seen over the past 70 years include age of married individuals increasing. We've already talked about that. A broadening of the dating pool. I think this one, and this was brought out in some of the discussions, the dating pool is broadening in a number of ways, right? I think in one way, the things we've talked about, like more people are waiting to get married. So there are more single individuals out in the world. More people are, we have, because of technology, we have more access, right? So I think dating apps, where it used to be that if you lived in Boone, North Carolina, you basically had access to people in Boone, Blowing Rock, Wilkesboro, Ashe County. You might drive off the mountain to see someone, but it didn't make any sense to engage with a person who lived in Ohio for any reason, but now that we can FaceTime. And I mean, we basically have people in the palm of our hand, no matter where we are. I think that in and of itself has really opened up kind of the world, you know, for the dating pool now. So definitely a variety of factors at play there, but the dating pool is much broader than it used to be. Cohabitation has pretty much become normalized in our society now, you know, so 50 years ago, it looked much different to live together before you were married to an individual. Nowadays, not so much, right? It's pretty much become normative behavior. And so that's a big shift that we've seen as a society. We talked about gender roles and gender role ideology a lot last week, but the general trend and shift has been towards more egalitarian or equal playing field between genders, right? So there is really no longer a sense that, you know, women's role is in the home while the man is out doing the provision. That has pretty much gone by the wayside. And so that's been, again, another major shift that we've seen. And then a positive thing that we have seen in terms of dating relationships is safer sex practices between both genders, between male and female. So that is just something to note that, you know, is impacting the dating world, people's dating experiences. Also related to dating, the ideas of hanging out, which is basically, you know, you have the one person that you are intent to spend time with, but you're going out in the context of a larger social group, right? So you're spending more time together in a larger group context. Hooking up, defined in the text as a sexual encounter between two individuals who have no relationship commitment. So it is sex and that's it. There's no expectation of commitment or you know, anything beyond that sexual encounter. And then long distance relationships. Just as a note, the text defines long distance as being separated from a romantic partner by more than 500 miles. So oftentimes people have, you know, shorter long distance relationships than that. But, you know, again, I think because of technology and because of societal trends, we're seeing people engaging in these types of relationships more and more. And they can be further and further apart and still sort of make it work. It's a viable relationship. Someone in the discussion posed the question sort of how much distance is too much distance, you know, and I think, again, that's a pretty individualized question. I think it depends a lot on how that's all handled. And I really think it still comes back to communication, you know, and articulating what you need and want out of the relationship. But definitely a challenge, might have some benefits as well. All right, different types of cohabitators. These first few are going to be important for you. There's two slides of them. I'm sorry, no. This first slide, it's going to be important for you to kind of understand the different types of cohabitators. And then when we move forward into the next slide, we'll talk about the rationale or kind of the reasons why people choose these relationships. And you'll hear a bit of that kind of as we talk through the different styles also. But the first type of cohabitation relationship is called the here and now, right? So these are people who are partnering in a relationship. They're really just kind of having fun for the time being, and they're not necessarily living together with any intent of furthering the relationship long term. It's very much about living in the present, but living together in the present. The second type of cohabitation relationship is called testers. Testers is kind of, you know, at the very beginning, we had that conversation about if I wanted to know what it would be like to live with this person. I could go on a trip with them. This is kind of the expanded version of that, where some people really feel very strongly that they are not willing to commit to living with a person for the rest of their lives without doing it in sort of a test run approach, right? So these people are testing the waters to see, will it work for me to be living with this person long term? In about half of the relationships that were studied in the study cited in the text, women tended to be more committed than men in these tester relationships. Women were very much in it to win it, and men maybe not so much. And so that resulted in lower quality relationships for both partners. Another form of cohabitation is people who are engaged, right? They are already planning to be married. They've committed to living together as kind of a step in the process towards marriage. These couples tend to report the highest levels of satisfaction and the lowest levels of conflict within their relationships. And they generally have higher quality relationships than other cohabitators. So people who are engaged tend to be more satisfied in that, in those circumstances than, say, a here and now cohabitation situation. Number 4 is money savers. This one is exactly what it sounds like. This is a lifestyle born out of convenience, specifically related to the economics, right? So oftentimes it's just financially more viable to live with another person than it is to live independently. And research has noted that working class individuals tend to kind of jump into these cohabitation relationships more quickly than middle class individuals. This has implications for a lot of things in terms of the future of these relationships and socioeconomic pressures and how they kind of play into partner relationships. But generally, you just need to know that money savers are in it for the financial benefit. The next, number 5, pension partners. These tend to be older couples. They have been married before, and they're still deriving some sort of financial, usually, benefits from a previous marriage, but they're living with someone new. Marrying this new partner would mean that they have to give up their pension benefits from the previous marriage. So they often choose to just cohabitate without marriage because, again, it's more financially viable, but for a different reason related to pension. Alimony, number 6, alimony maintenance. It's the same idea, except that rather than being like a retirement benefit from a previous relationship, this is specific to divorce, right? So oftentimes when couples divorce, one partner is required to pay alimony in a certain amount to the previous partner. They may choose to not marry again because they wouldn't want to lose that financial security. Speaking of security, number 7, so sorry about that. Number 7 is called security blankets. These are basically people who choose to live with another person because they really need some sort of social and emotional security. They really, take comfort in having another person in their home in a kind of committed way. So it's less about mutual attraction or any of the benefits, that we've talked about so far. They simply want someone else living in their home because living alone does not feel good to them. So it's called security blanket cohabitation. Rebellious cohabitators are usually rebelling against values of their family of origin. They're trying to sort of break away, establish independence. It's about, making my own choices, really sort of rebelling against a certain lifestyle. And so those folks are called rebellious cohabitators. And then the last category that we'll talk about are called marriage nevers. We kind of discussed this in our chat discussion, right? That some people just have a really jaded view of marriage relationships. They have a fear about how marriage might end up, and or some people truly believe that marriage would negatively impact their partner relationship. And so, you know, for fear of changing the dynamics with their partner or whatever, they choose to live together, but to not become married. So they are referred to as marriage never cohabitators. So the study that was cited in the text is this Ortel from 2013. They interviewed 48 long-term cohabitators, and they came up with these 6 general themes that really drove this decision for folks. People said they just really kind of took that stance that we talked about in the marriage never type. 38% of the couples interviewed said they really just felt marriage was unnecessary to their happiness and satisfaction as a couple. So those folks are referred to as, or the theme there was that they just wanted to remain marriage free. Another theme for why people would choose to live together and not become married is risk aversion, right? Again, we've talked about this. They're trying to avoid disastrous marriages that they maybe had witnessed in other family members or in other societal relationships that they were familiar with, you know. Marriage boycott. This is the idea that some people reject the institution of marriage. They reject the fact that, you know, government defined at one time marriage as heterosexual only. And so in taking a stance as, you know, an ally with the LGBTQIA community, or for some other personal reason, they just choose to boycott marriage as an institution. And that's their sort of stance on it. Sexism dissent. Another idea here for why people might choose to never get married, but to be, you know, long-term cohabitators, is this idea that marriage, you know, it's sort of rooted in a patriarchal history, speaks to submission and control of women. These types of ideas are often unappealing to some people, and so they choose to, you know, avoid marriage in this idea of sexism dissent. The other two, we've again kind of already touched on. The American dreamer. This is the notion that a lot of people are waiting to pay off student loans. They're waiting to, you know, get their career going. Lots of things that they want to do before they marry. So they're called American dreamers, who might wait and or choose to not get married and cohabitate. And then the last is because of economic disincentives, right? So we talked about some benefits to economic benefits to not marrying another individual. This is kind of a different approach to that, where, you know, sometimes you meet a partner who carries $30,000 worth of debt into the relationship and that type of thing, in order to avoid connecting yourself financially with someone's economic disadvantages, could be a reason to assume a long-term cohabitation relationship. Okay, we're going to talk for just a minute about the advantages and disadvantages of cohabitation, okay? Compared to uninvolved individuals or individuals who are in relationships, committed relationships, but are not living together, people who are cohabitating tend to report a general sense of well-being in their relationship and higher life satisfaction. So it is positively related to an increased sense of well-being and relationship satisfaction. Another advantage is that cohabitating with another person tends to delay marriage. And the longer a person waits to get married, generally speaking, the better the outcome of their relationship tends to be. So cohabitating effectively delays the marriage timeline, and it allows people to enter into a marriage relationship a bit more mature, with a bit more life experience under their belt. There's lots of reasons why this might be advantageous. Sort of related to that is that you have a better knowledge of yourself and your partner if you cohabitate before you get married. You've already come to know that your partner leaves cabinet doors half open and that drives you insane, or that your partner compulsively cleans and makes the bed, and you sort of know whether or not that's going to work for you or whether or not that's not going to work for you. And another idea, sorry about that, is related to safety. Sometimes single women, live in cohabitating situations because they want to have sort of a safer living situation. It could be seen that having a male or a partner in the home could be a deterrent for break-ins, whatever. Of course, I would argue that you can also gain those same benefits from, living with a roommate. So not necessarily a reason to cohabitate with a romantic partner, but a possible advantage. Some drawbacks. People tend to report more problems in cohabitating relationships, more conflict, and higher dissolution. So that is breaking up, moving out, as compared to married relationships, right? So cohabitating relationships don't tend to last as long as, when you compare them to marriage relationships. Some people report feeling tricked or sort of used, especially when expectations within the relationship differ. So if a more invested partner, moves in with the partner with the expectation that we are going to get engaged, get married, whatever, and that doesn't work out, they might walk away with these feelings of being sort of duped in this relationship. This living arrangement of cohabitation often does not mesh well with the older generational values that are sometimes held by people's families of origin. So it can cause parental problems, conflict in kind of the nuclear family. There are some economic disadvantages to cohabitation. So, sometimes this is related to health insurance, Social Security drawings, retirement benefits. Those types of things are sometimes not extended to cohabitating partners like they are to married partners. So that can be an economic drawback. And then we kind of talked about some of the effects on children in terms of thinking about living together apart. But, again, when you're bringing, when you're raising children in a family dynamic of any sort, you have to consider the effects that, the relationship's going to have on the children. About 40% of children spend some time in a home with cohabitating adults. And these children are generally more likely to experience disillusion or the breakup of those parent relationships as compared to children in homes with married parents. This can, result in maladjustments, behavior challenges, that sort of thing. So there are some clear advantages, also clear drawbacks. The book talks about the legal aspects of cohabitation. And I do want to say before I move on, it's important to note that people who routinely and habitually engage in cohabitating relationships, they tend to have lower satisfaction rates. So I know I said, I'm going to go back to advantages, this sense of well-being. That is true, right? That people in cohabitating relationships do tend to report higher levels of life satisfaction, sense of well-being than partners who are not living together. Where it becomes problematic for folks is when they do this over and over with different partners, and then that shifts, right? And your sense of well-being and your sense of satisfaction with life, it actually has negative impacts when people habitually cohabitate with different partners. So it's an important distinction to make there, that when it's done over and over, you know, too much of a good thing or whatever. Legal aspects of cohabitation, common law marriage. Does anyone know what the time frame for most states to recognize a partnership as married, even though they haven't been? That's what a common law marriage is. It's usually somewhere around the 7-year mark. 7 years, yeah. And so basically, again, you know, in the eyes of the law, if you have been living together with a partner for 7+ years, then things like alimony, child support, all of those kind of legal things are looked at in the exact same way as if you were legally married to that individual. Child support and child inheritance custody issues, they all become sort of, you know, more complicated if people have been cohabitating versus just dating or been married. So things to consider when you're making decisions about cohabitation, marriage, those types of things. I think the living together apart, you know, you saw the video, you're pretty familiar with this concept. I'm not going to spend much time talking about it. I do want to say it's a phenomenon that 1.7 million married couples are engaged in. So it's, you know, becoming fairly common practice for a lot of people. And I can think of very clear advantages, reasons why it might work well. Some of those, you know, space, privacy, personal freedom, some things that are, you know, kind of, you wouldn't necessarily think of. Variable sleep needs. I used to babysit for a family. The dad was an ER doctor who worked all night. They actually had, they lived in a home together, but there was like a guest house that had separate access. And so when he needed to come in and sleep during the day, he would sleep in a different part of the home. That's not exactly the same thing, but, you know, you can imagine that sometimes people have very drastic differences in terms of what they need day to day, allergies, things like that. You know, there are sometimes very valuable reasons that this might work well for people. And then also some clear, you know, disadvantages that I'm sure you've thought about from your reading and discussion so far. So that brings us to the end of our chapter 4 content. So if you'll take a second to type your name into the chat as record of you being here. I'm seeing a question. At what point are married couples considered separated but not divorced? That, and I think it's state by state. In North Carolina, you have to be legally separated for a year before you're divorced. And that legal separation date is actually kind of the onus of when that starts is on the couple. Sometimes couples legally separate, but they're still living in the same space because of the logistics issues, you know. But once you consider yourself legally separated and you as a couple have made a decision to part ways, that's kind of recognized in the eyes of the law as the beginning of your separation. And then that has to go for at least a year before the divorce can take place. Any other questions related to any of this stuff or questions about exam 1 coming up next week? Yes, I will stay on for a few minutes once this is over. And so if you don't have any further questions and you've typed your name into the chat, then you're good for today. And I will see you all next week on Wednesday. But I'll be here for a few more minutes if anybody needs to chat or ask me anything.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.